You feel so jaded and you feel so hollow from the resentment that's growing in you. So that's why collectivism is so alluring to people who are upset, because you're going to get something out of it. That's how it gets used in politics, and we see it today too. We see it more than ever. Societal stress, political stress, especially we feel it here in the United States. Increased inflation, of course, you feel it too with these sort of like World War III on the horizon talks. When you become emotional, you usually overreact or you underreact. If you overreact, you can take action that doesn't really benefit you. It kind of it can serve your opponent or whoever your adversary is. And if you underreact, same thing happens. You're failing to take action. You can use it to manipulate others, and that's why it's such a powerful tool in politics.
In one of your recent articles, you've mentioned that Donald Trump, during his campaign, has essentially put an emphasis on a really unusual pledge or a promise, which was to reduce stress. What's that all about?
Well, we're under a lot of stress right now, societal stress, political stress, especially we feel it here in the United States, increased inflation. Of course, you feel it too with these sort of like World War III on the horizon talks. And so we're under a lot of stress. And what Donald Trump was doing is he was pledging to reduce that stress, because that's something that you can do when you're at that level. And the fact is, we're under a lot of stress right now. I mean, a majority of people say that here in the United States say that the election has negatively impacted their mental health, and that's because of all the stress we're met with, the political stress on a daily basis. So that was kind of a broader pledge that kind of encompassed all of his other promises all at once, which is to basically take the burden off the American people, because we're feeling it and it's having negative side effects.
I think it was really unusual for him to pledge something like that, because not only stress is probably one of these words that is very real, but at the same time, it's very overused. But also, like, Donald Trump is quite polarizing figure within the States. So you've obviously got majority of Americans that voted him into the presidency, but then there is also this massive narrative within the media about what a dictator he is and what a terrible person he is. So I think there was this, it was almost like a really surprising narrative to hear from him. And given what a polarizing figure he is, how do you sort of see that landing within the other, less than a half of the population that perhaps wanted Kamala Harris in the office?
Right. Well, they're not going to believe it, of course. But the fact is, I think a lot of people comparing how they felt from 2016 to 2020 versus 2020 to 2024, regardless of the media spin and regardless of the stories that they were reading at the time about how bad things were going, on a personal level, I think people were feeling that stress a lot less during those years. And that's kind of what led to the popular vote win, was people were comparing their experiences from those two time periods and saying, boy, I was under less stress before than I am now. And that's, price of gas, the real dangers of war we're hearing about and experiencing now, inflation, all these things that are directly impacting people, and people don't feel good about it. So I think a lot of people were more trusting of him this time around, especially with a back record, and looking and saying, okay, I felt better then than I did now. But as far as the other side, I think a lot of people switched over. There are some people that are just never going to switch over. They're still going to just kind of believe what they believe and that sort of thing. But a lot of people were convinced, and I think they went with their gut on that, based on how they felt and how they perceived the two different administrations.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the 70s. Arguably speaking, the risk of potential war that would engulf in the entire world was higher. I'm not denying that we are definitely heading, and we have been around quite uncomfortable territories already, with the other sort of superpowers raising and definitely trying to question and perhaps sort of get the United States off the pedestal of, the world's sort of peacemaker and a peace leader. but arguably in 70s and 60s during the Cold War, there was way more risk of the real huge conflict. What is it about our political discussions, the culture that we now have, that makes politics such a passionate subject for people that previously were not particularly political? What do you think has been happening, sort of, that so many people are starting to get involved?
Well, what happened is we've become very emotional about politics. And if we look back at how that happened, well, the first thing we could do is we could define stress. We could really define what we're talking about when we use that word stress, because it gets thrown around a lot by clinicians and doctors and psychiatrists and people who meditate, just casual people too. But stress really is it's an outside pressure. It's something that pushes on us and makes us feel or a certain way or do a certain thing, react a certain way. There's physical stress. We talk about physical stress like a stress test, like your doctor puts you on when you're running on a treadmill and they're going to measure how your heart performs. That's a physical stress. And that stress is the treadmill, running on the treadmill. But then we have emotional stress and we have mental stress. And that's really what we mean when we say we're under a lot of stress. And that's a temptation to react emotionally, or as I say, a temptation to resent, to be resentful. And the reason I use the word resentment is because if you look at the Latin roots of the word resentment, it's which is in turn or in response, like react, respond, and sentire, which is to feel. So and it's usually a negative feeling. So when you feel something negative in response to an outside stimulus, that's a response to stress. So a stress is really a temptation to resent, an emotional stress. So we feel these things, and that changes how you react. It changes how you perform. It changes your behavior. So when you become emotional, you overreact or you underreact. If you overreact, you can take action that doesn't really benefit you. It kind of it can serve your opponent or whoever your adversary is. And if you underreact, same thing happens. You're failing to take action. In my case, in college, I worked at a grocery store during the summers, and we had lots of customers, repeat customers that would come in all the time. And one in particular was this older lady who was, she was pretty mean, and everybody knew who she was. Nobody liked dealing with her. And she used to yell at us, and she used to put orders in with us, special orders, and we would get them wrong, and she would yell at us and all that. And I had one coworker in particular who was essentially afraid to deal with her. He would be completely immobilized by this fear he had. I'd find him scurrying around in the back or in the back room in the corners of the store. He'd basically become completely incompetent for a good hour just because this old lady's in the same building with him. So he was underreacting. He was failing to act because he still had a job to do and he couldn't do it. So when you know this about emotions, or even when you don't know it, but when you do directly know it, you can use it to manipulate others. And that's why it's such a powerful tool in politics. So back in the 60s and the 70s, a very influential figure came about. His name was Saul Alinsky. And his name is a bit overplayed here in the United States because it became a buzzword in the 90s among conservatives here. As sort of the progressive boogeyman, because he wrote the book on progressive politics. It was called Rules for Radicals. And it was essentially a playbook on what to do to get support and to get your way in politics. And as a community organizer, he would go to communities and he would create coalitions of the different factions, the different smaller factions, like it could be churches, labor unions. He would get them all together and he would get them to intimidate and negotiate with whatever the prevalent power structure was. Usually could be a group of landlords or a corporation, something like that. So he would do that. And eventually he would get his way in the end and get an outcome that benefited those smaller groups as a result of them coming together under his leadership. So what he used to do, however, which is different than just the pragmatic sort of planning involved in making this happen, is he used to upset his opponents. He used to evoke what he called irrational anger in his opponents. And he did that because he knew that if he was able to make them emotional, he'd be able to get his way in the end. He'd be able to cause some sort of over or under reaction from them. They would lose their footing and they would mess themselves up, is basically what it is. But he would take credit for that because he knew that he was the one upsetting them. In his most famous example, he went into Rochester, New York, which is upstate New York, to take on Kodak, the film company. And he was invited by some local church leaders to the area. They wanted more jobs, more training programs, things like that. So he got there, and the first thing he did when he gets off the plane is he calls Kodak racist. That's the first thing he does to the media. And now he doesn't say that he doesn't say they're racist, but he makes a joke. He ridicules them. He says that the only thing they've done for race relations is create color film. And now this is a bit mild compared to today's political rhetoric that we hear, but it's used so much now we're almost used to it. But back then that's kind of an inflammatory, insulting thing to say in the 60s and 70s. I believe this was the early 60s at the time. So he did that, and as he puts it, he totally upset the leadership of Kodak because they saw themselves as a charitable, sort of philanthropic, almost sort of center of the town. They were the largest employer of the city, and they were seen very well by the residents. So to be called that was a major insult. And as he puts it, it upset them so much they flubbed negotiations going forward. They actually made agreements that they couldn't hold. They agreed to training programs from people that were unauthorized to do it. They had to walk it back, but the town had already heard about it from the media. So then they lost the trust of the town, and their whole negotiation strategy fell apart. And Saul Alinsky with his coalition they end up getting what they wanted at the end. And he credits that initial resentment, that initial kind of seed of bitterness that he was able to sow in them with the ridicule, calling them, basically implying they were racist. He credits that to his eventual win, to their own downfall. So that's how it gets used in politics. And we see it today too. We see it more than ever.
Do you think that that's by design? That the entire sort of the arguments on the entire political spectrum, do you actually think that the politicians nowadays are using that strategy, let's say, quite consciously, or whether it just became baked into the systems?
I think some people know they're consciously doing it. I mean, Saul Alinsky was explicit in the technique. He said this works. He knew that it worked. I think a lot of people sort of intuitively understand it, and they do it. When somebody gets under your skin and it's like, they said that exact thing at that exact moment to upset you. It's like, well, what are they wicked? Are they plotting against me or something? Maybe to a degree they are. I'm just talking about in your personal life. This can happen to anybody. But to another degree, they don't even know they're doing it. It's just something that works, and it's kind of a learned behavior. A total master of ridicule, on going in the other direction, from instead of progressive to conservative the other way, is Donald Trump. He was a major. He used ridicule in a major way, especially during the 2015 and 2016 campaign when he unveiled the nicknames for everybody. Of course, now most recently we had Crooked Joe and Sleepy Joe, but it didn't have as good of a ring to it as Crooked Hillary did back in 2016. And Crooked Hillary is a great example because if you look at it, she had things in her background that were questionable, and he brought light to that. He was able to brand her a certain way with that nickname. And a lot of people say that she lost the election because she was so unlikable. She was so disliked. But if you look back, she wasn't as disliked in the beginning of the election, in the primaries and everything, as she was by the end. And the reason is she changed along the way. By his ridicule was able to get under her skin and upset her. And she actually became more unlikable, more nasty, to use that word, right, along the way. And eventually she had that a bit of an outburst where she called half of Donald Trump's base deplorables, right, a basket of deplorables. And now the interesting thing about that is that wasn't, I'm calling it an outburst, but it really wasn't. Those remarks were planned ahead of time. I'm not sure if they were in the teleprompter, but she had actually used that sort of line in earlier talks too, probably not televised, but it was an idea that was already in her head. And even as a seasoned politician, somebody who should really know better than to say that, she didn't realize it at the time, and it ended up being a huge blow to her. And that's because she was upset. She was upset. She was frazzled. She had contempt for what was going on, and she made mistakes. And you could see the anger boiling up in her. So that's what led to her being so disliked, and eventually not really being able to win in 2016.
I was laughing earlier on when you said about these nicknames that the politicians are given, bearing in mind how many nicknames made an international stage within our current prime minister. I think two-tier Keir is like just a worldwide phenomenon right now, but we've got more. We've got the Mad Miliband, who is our energy minister, who is just adamant that he's going to essentially just bankrupt the country by trying to get to the net zero target. So I think that's his goal, or it seems to be anyway. But going back to sort of what you were saying about all of these emotions and how maybe Hillary Clinton sort of didn't really manage to contain hers. It's I suppose we sometimes think that politicians running the country, that they've got somehow some sort of training, that they're somehow prepared for the job, but we do react like that. Like, it is easy to get us riled up about something, and there is even this joke where people will sometimes, even your friends will sometimes get you riled up about something. They know how to press your buttons. So that sort of natural instinct is essentially being used in a manipulative way to, get your way essentially in politics. But there is the other side of it where there is genuinely some events going on in politics that are enraging. They are absolutely outrageous. So it's a natural reaction to be angry. But then essentially we then find ourselves in a spot where it is our emotions that are sort of dictating our actions. So what can be done about it, or what's actually happening on, like, in terms of in our brain? Let's say that there is something either that you're reading in the news that is getting you like riled up. What is actually happening, and how is that sort of influencing you and your decision making?
Right. Well, we have natural reactions to things we don't like. They're built in, they're biological, they're evolutionary. We have kind of a biological fear, biological anger, and I'm calling it biological because it's our brain activates, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in, our amygdala fires, and hormones release, and we tense up and we breathe a little bit harder, and our heart pumps. I mean, if you see a wild animal, if you see a bear, you're going to need to run the other direction. You're going to be scared, right? Or if somebody, to go back like to evolutionary example, a primal example, if somebody's stealing your food, you're gonna want to fight back, right? So we have these things built in, and they're survival instincts. The problem is that when these emotions brood in us, when we're ruminating, when we're overthinking, when we're brooding these things, these emotions build up in us. And on a political level, when we're exposed to things that are upsetting us on an ongoing basis all the time, just constant temptations to be upset. So we're living in this sort of state of brooding in these negative emotions. It changes how we think. It can, when it happens to a whole nation, it can supplant an entire ethos, an entire value system for a people. There's an example from World War II. A psychiatrist named Joost Meerlo. He lived in the Netherlands, and he lived through the occupation of his country by Nazi Germany. And as a psychiatrist, he was interested in the actual internal motivation that was going on within people, not just the sort of pragmatic elements of war, but also like, why are these people even doing these things in the first place? What's motivating them to act this way? And he studied it, and he came to the conclusion after a while that when resentment and hate grow in your mind, grow in your heart, it begins to direct all your action and thinking. And that can be not just impulsive, it can be an entire value system. I mean, we're talking about Nazi Germany. They were intellectual people. They wrote books about their philosophy and all, and were reasoned behind it. But they had resentment and hate. And so that's what he determined. And he, as he puts it, when you're in that state, you're attracted to movements. You're attracted to people who make promises to supply some sort of satisfaction, some sort of relief for the pain you're in, because it's draining for your energy, and it's painful to be in that sort of state all the time. And as he put it, the collectivity, so a group, a movement, has more élan vital, which is French. I don't speak French, so my accent's no good. But it's French for life force. Essentially, it means energy. You're going to get something out of that because you feel so jaded and you feel so hollow from the resentment that's growing in you. So that's why collectivism is so alluring to people who are upset, because you're going to get something out of it. You've been promised something as a result, and it means you can't be thinking clearly because you're being led by your emotions. So that can happen on a national scale, and that's when things get dangerous. And that's what we have to be. That's what we have to be on the lookout for happening to us. Even no matter your political leanings, you could go left or could go right, but that sort of attraction to a collective, a movement, in order to feel whole after being just bombarded with stress, tempting you to resent and get angry. That's something we have to be on the lookout for.
The latest book that I've read had that sort of overreaction, that whiplash overreaction to something. So there was essentially like a social mania that swiped through the society, and the counter reaction to that was essentially also pathological, but just went in the other direction. So do we actually know, like, the research in terms of how malleable or how easily we are, or how much easier we are manipulated if we are sort of running on high emotions against sort of the baseline? Do you know if there was anyone that actually done that research?
Well, I think things like that have been researched a lot. I mean, to go to extreme example, there are different paradigms that people have come up with for like radicalization, for example, and it always starts with contempt. It always starts with hate. Well, actually, I should say the hate does lead to radicalization, but before that is usually traumatic experiences, like a lot of stress. So heavy stress, traumatic experiences, political stress, terrorist attacks, those types of things lead to people becoming very upset, and then they adopt value systems that are polar reactions to those things, but usually go too far in the other direction. So that's usually the general paradigm that I believe psychiatrists or psychologists have developed over the years for sort of radicalization. But it can happen on a small scale too, where somebody just becomes bitter, they become angry, and maybe they're not radical necessarily, but they've gone a little too far in the other direction. And you're like, well, what caused them to become this way? It's usually because they're upset. Mm-hmm. There's as far as relief or reduction goes, the problem with that is that you really can't rely on that as sort of a therapeutic form of getting over these things, because we don't have control over the amount of stress in our lives. We can't control what your prime minister is going to say, or who the next president is directly. We can't control these things here in the United States. But what we can do is we can build resilience to that. So by building resilience to that, you can step back from your emotions, step back out of the thoughts, because what happens is the rumination, the brooding, the thoughts, that's what leads to the anger, the contempt, the fear. So if you step back from those, you can step back from that, step back from your emotions, and you can let go of those things. You can forgive in real time. You can make objective decisions. You can discern in the present moment without being sort of swayed one way or the other at the mercy of your emotions. And you can build stress resilience by doing that. There's a study out of Harvard from 2012 where they took a group of people and they put them under what's considered by most to be like one of the most stressful tasks you can do. They had them do public speaking, which everybody hates. Nobody likes public speaking. So, but what they did was they took a group, a subgroup of that, and beforehand they said, okay, we're going to take you aside and we're going to teach you. And they gave them all this educational material. They said, we're going to teach you that the best way to overcome stress, the best way to handle these challenges is to simply go through it. You're going to notice your body's reaction. Your heart's going to beat faster. You're going to breathe harder. Your muscles are going to tense up. But you're designed to go through these tough situations. That's your body reacting well in order to help you overcome it. And that's a physical response. And what they thought was that they could sort of cut off the emotional loop that develops where you sense your own body reacting, you get scared, you get emotional, fearful, frightened. They could cut that off and just have somebody do the task without sort of that emotional baggage developing by their overthinking as it's happening. And another group they took and they gave them almost the exact opposite advice. They said the best way to overcome stressful events is to ignore it. Just take a break, ignore it. And they gave them a little technique where they look off to the side, stare at a blank wall for a few seconds, something like that. And just like ignore it for a second. And what happened was the group that was essentially taught you're meant to go through these things, you're designed to overcome these stressful events, that group performed way better. They gave them some math tasks afterward. They performed better on those. They made less mistakes. They were less distracted by negativity, negative words that were thrown at them. And during the test itself, during the public speaking task, they actually had a better cardiac response. Their heart beat more efficiently. Their blood vessels were less constricted compared to the group that was ignoring the stress, so to speak. So it goes to show you that even in that simple realization, there's a lot of power there. There's the idea that, okay, I'm designed to go through this. It's almost a kind of simple form of forgiveness in a way, because what you're doing is you're accepting the reality of the situation and you're letting go of the temptation to resent it. And you're going through it anyway. You're not ignoring it. You're not distracting yourself. You're not pretending it's not happening. You're going through it anyway, realizing that you're meant to overcome these challenges. So even that simple realization has a lot of power to build stress resilience and affect both your mental health, your performance, and your physical health too.
I think nowadays it is very difficult to actually stay in the loop with what's happening and not to sort of get riled up on daily basis. It's not even daily basis, several times a day, because every time you click onto Facebook or Instagram or X, you will definitely see some of the stuff that you want to see, but you will definitely also see some of the negative things that will be affecting you emotionally. So perhaps it was easier for us to stay bit more connected to yourself and bit more calm throughout the whatever was happening in politics 50 years ago, 20 years ago, before the social media. Now that we are essentially consuming the news most of the time through social media or through X, it is actually very difficult not to sort of get yourself, triggered several times a day. And, trigger warnings and being triggered is probably another term that is overused and, was taking the mick off essentially, because, a lot of students and a lot of people that, we would describe as woke were always triggered. But the news cycle definitely triggered the negative thinking or can put you in the negative mood. So for people that actually still want to stay connected to what's going on around them, what are the options?
Well, the best thing you can do is when something like that happens, when you're reading a news story and you're tempted to become upset, simply realizing that is happening has a lot of power. It does. Because what's going to happen, you're going to see your physical reaction. You're going to realize, oh my God, I'm tempted to be upset right now. And you're tempted to overthink. You're tempted to sort of ruminate on it, to brood, to think about why these things are happening and get lost in your thoughts in your head. But what happens is when you're ruminating, that's what causes the anger. That's what causes the resentment. So just by realizing that, stepping back, stepping out of the thoughts, you're not going to perceive stress as much. There's an interesting study. They found that people who didn't ruminate, who didn't overthink as much, they didn't have as much anger, they didn't have as emotional reactions to things, and they had the perception of being under less stress. So even though they were under the same amount of stress, they were experiencing the same things. Maybe, let's say in this example, reading the same news articles. By not overthinking about these things, they weren't having as much perceived stress. It wasn't having a strong effect on their mental health, on taking up as much energy. So simply stepping back out of the thoughts, realizing when it's happening, that simple thing has a lot of power to reduce the effect of stress right away on you.
Okay. I'm just trying to sort of think and conjure up like a Stillman against, getting outraged, because let's say that, you see something that is really pissing you off. I mean, in the UK right now, the grooming gang scandal is has finally come to the forefront, to the point where the politicians can no longer ignore it like they have been for the last 25 years. And there is very, very good reason for people to be genuinely angry. Mm-hmm. And you could make an argument that that anger is a fuel for a positive action. So currently, that babbling anger within the public is there for the politicians to do something about, and it's a righteous thing for people to be seriously angry about. So by then sort of trying to step back from it, are we then not perhaps like taking the fuel from the energy that you need to get you to change something?
I don't think so. I think we're not, and I think the reason is when you're building stress resilience, when you're realizing the reality of a situation, you can actually perform more competently. You can make better decisions in the present moment instead of needing to distract yourself or getting caught up in the emotions. So I don't think we need to rely on sort of these seeds of anger to get things done. I do think we have to be able to realize right from wrong. We have to be able to discern and then take action when needed. Like in the Harvard study, those people performed better when they were able to sort of step back and cut off that temptation to freak out under stress. So I think that's very important. If we look back throughout history, even I like studying history and American history, the American Revolution, and comparing that to the French Revolution. And you see, well, both sides of, well, I know you're English, so you might see things differently, but both sides of both. Let me start over. The American Revolution, right? They felt that they were under they were experiencing injustice, and the French people felt they were experiencing injustice too. But they both handled the situation a lot differently. In America, there was sort of throughout all the colonies, there was Protestant Christianity was very strong. And a lot of Protestant Christians supported the revolution. A lot of clergy supported the American Revolution. Whereas in France, the French Revolution sort of went against religion altogether. They converted their churches into houses of reason, and took a more atheist approach to things. But in Christianity, there's this idea of forgiveness. And it's not just a kind of forgiveness where we hold our hands, and sing Kumbaya and all get along at the end. It's a forgiveness rooted in the idea of loving your enemies. It's love your enemies forgiveness. And what that implies is that you're still going to have enemies. You're still going to have people who are wronging you, and you're still going to want to do something about that. You're still going to want justice. But if you can forgive them, you'll be able to handle the situation the right way. Whereas in France, they didn't have that idea. They went overboard, and their revolution ended up not working out. They ended up destroying themselves. They imploded because they didn't have this idea of forgiveness that sort of acts as almost like a regulator, and helps you make decisions, be strong, live in the present moment, and take the right action without being swept up in sort of a rage and the emotions of the situation. So I do think we need that type of forgiveness now, where you're discerning right from wrong, you're seeking justice, you want the right thing done, but you're not getting caught up in your emotions, because what happens is you will end up adopting a value system, you will end up making choices, you will end up doing things at the end of the day that are probably the opposite of what your intentions are going in. So that's why watching your emotions and sort of keeping them in check that way throughout the day and throughout your life is so important.
And I think a lot of it was the idea of forgiveness and gratitude was actually covered in at the end of Douglas Murray's book, and I think it was The Madness of Crowds. where he sort of really ended the book by saying that, there is essentially a lot of people that are finding themselves on the opposite side of the argument, but at the end of the day, we still need to find a way to live together. And that once one argument wins, for example, we need to find the way to forgive those that were, in the wrong. And I think as long as sort of people start behaving in a way that is then sort of, let's say, socially acceptable by whichever side turned out to be right, it's easier done once actually people sort of hold their hand up and say, yeah, I did something wrong. I think it's a bit more difficult for people to do that when the other side is still like doggedly, stubbornly sticking to their argument, even though it is widely disproven, for example, as false. So do you still think that we need to still forgive these people and continue cooperating with them, even though they are constantly, for example, like not really admitting that they were wrong at some point?
I think that you have to forgive everybody, no matter how wrong they are. It doesn't mean that you have to be nice to them. It doesn't mean you have to be polite. It doesn't mean that you have to get along with them at the end of the day. But it does leave that opportunity open if they come around. But you still have to do the right thing. I know Douglas Murray he's been really vocal about this and good at exposing these things. Of course, he talked a lot about the riots and the protests that happened during last summer in the UK. And when you look at that, we see you had protesters and counter protesters too. And of course, I'm really too far away to know exactly what's happening there. I'm not steeped in the political context to know exactly what's happened. But from what I saw, there was a horrible, tragic event, a terrible thing done by a terrible person. And then there were riots and protests and maybe vandalism and looting as a result that probably went overboard. It probably was an overreaction. And then you had counter protesters and counter rioters. And as it turned out, a lot of that was based on false information about the origins of this person who did this terrible thing. So right there, you have an emotional, impulsive reaction rooted in anger that, well, nobody should be rioting and looting in the first place. But you had false information that was able to rile people up and cause them to take action that they shouldn't have taken. So that's why forgiving is so important. And now it doesn't mean that you don't do anything about it. It doesn't mean that that person, shouldn't be in jail or something like that. But it does mean that we have to let go of these emotions, and we have to make sure we're healthy ourselves. We have to keep our mental health too. So we don't want to lose that as a result of all the negative things going around. And that's why building stress resilience is what I emphasize, because you'll be able to handle those things. We need to be able to handle those things. We need justice. We need to, there are bad things going on, and we can't put our heads in the sand and pretend it's not. But at the same time, we don't want to spiral out of control ourselves as a reaction based in anger and fear to these bad things we're seeing.
Yeah, I think certainly the anger did spark the riots in the UK. There was a good reason for people to be angry, and people suspected who was responsible for the act that happened, because native Brits, people that have been in these isles for 5 centuries, they don't really commit these type of crimes. They don't really commit these type of atrocities. And that particular incident was so barbaric that people straight away suspected who might be behind them. And there was a suppression of the information from the mainstream media. So even though the identity of the person that has been that is sort of behind these crimes, and we are yet to actually get the trial. So at this moment in time, it is alleged murderer, but the identity of the alleged murderer was covered up essentially by the mainstream media, and then it was revealed, or there was someone that started a rumor on X that he was Muslim, and then obviously the people then started riling up, especially in the sort of northwest towns where there are the clear issues with integrations, and they were essentially put down as far right sort of rioters and all that. It is months later that we've actually found out that indeed the person that has been arrested did have the I think he was trying to essentially come up with ricin. He was trying to build the ricin sort of poison, and he had an Al Qaeda manual at home. So the original suspicion from the public was actually quite correct, or it seems that it's been correct in terms of identifying where in the political sphere sort of the threat did come from. It was the sort of the suppression of it that I think was really unhelpful. But at this moment in time, any time that we get an eruption of violence, the mainstream media and the politicians try to do everything to suppress it, to control the public, instead of dealing with the symptom of why is the public so angry. But I mean, we had really uncomfortable couple of months in the UK. I don't think that we will be getting much healthier in terms of our mental sort of stress, in terms of the politics as we are going into the 2025. I would hope that grooming gang scandal is going to dominate the news, just in terms of actually getting the justice for the victims. But in the United States, I mean, you've had months of really quite tense politics. We've obviously had assassination attempts on the President Trump now. He's now taking the office. I think the one thing that did surprise me is I remember chatting to a couple of our friends, and we were saying that like the United States is heading for really, really tense election, and we suspected riots, whoever won. So what do you think happened in like American psyche that actually after the election, seemingly the mood sort of calmed down a little bit?
I think what happened is, to be honest with you, Kamala had such a big loss. It was bigger than anybody. A lot of people on the right, and including myself, actually predicted a landslide election. But this was not the sort of dominant narrative. This was people thought it was going to be close. But looking at the registration numbers, looking at the way that people were perceiving the current administration and Kamala's own competence compared to how things were under Trump, the things that had actually come true that he predicted that sounded crazy at the time, those things convinced a lot of people. It swayed a lot of opinions. It changed a lot of minds. So I think what happened was it was so overwhelming and so decisive of a win that whatever was planned or not planned, whatever reaction could have come about, sort of fizzled out. I think it blindsided a lot of the people who thought that they were going to have some legitimacy going in and fighting and showing some outrage at a Trump win. Mm-hmm. If the roles were reversed, if Trump had lost the election, the truth is we really don't see rioting. We really don't see mass protests of that style from conservatives. It doesn't happen often. When it does, it's relatively peaceful compared in the other direction. So I don't think that we would have had to worry about that necessarily. But I think that's kind of what happened. I think people were blindsided on the other side by the amount of support that Trump ended up getting at the end. As far as England and the UK goes, yeah, I mean, I'm not there, so I don't have the best. I don't have sort of the same insight that you do, or somebody who lives there. I try and listen to people like Douglas Murray and shows like that who for whom it's a little closer to home and sort of know what's going on there. But yeah, I mean, the fact that they lie and they cover things up, they do the same thing here when we have mass shootings here. It's like we're told of a manifesto that doesn't get released. Those evoke anger. It invokes rage. It invokes a lot of contempt in people for the government, not just for the people who commit the crimes, but for the government too. And if we can step back and sort of have that stress resilience, we're able to take decisive action. We're able to see the situation more objectively and not get lost in the passion of the moment. And I think that's important, because then we can have really serious conversations and hopefully some victories as a result of our sort of more discerning eye. Because those things are wrong. They're terrible things. And the fact that they don't tell anybody what's going on is awful. And like I said, they do the same thing here. But those are temptations to resent, and they do lead to overreactions, which can actually hurt the cause. So that's what I think we have to be on the lookout for.
Okay, so let's now sort of turn to the solutions then, because clearly we can't reverse the clock and go back in time to another century where we were not faced with, a lot of negativity, essentially, a lot of challenges in the news. And we do have challenges everywhere. We've got challenging economic realities. We've got challenging demographic realities. So how do we not just live through it and survive it, but how do we thrive despite all of these obstacles?
Well, the best way to do that is to, like I said, you have to step back in the moment. You have to see the temptation to resent in the moment when it's happening. When that happens, you're going to step out of the thinking. You're going to step back from the emotion. And as a result, you're going to have that kind of real-time forgiveness. You're going to be able to see that people are very wrong. They do very wrong things. But if you're not lost in your thinking, if you're not lost in your rumination, you're going to know the right thing to do at the right time. You're not going to be as negatively affected by it too. So that's the importance of that, and that's why it's important to build stress resilience in that way, instead of just reducing stress, taking a break. Those things have their place. I mean, it's good to take a break now and then, but the truth is we can't change all these things happening. And so we have to learn how to survive and how to thrive through it. So that's the way to do it.
So you've developed an app with your dad that essentially deals with that stress that is coming at us from every single direction. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about where did that come from? Like, at what point did you decide that you're going to create something like that? What pushed you towards it? And what you saw missing within the offer of apps that was already on the market?
Sure. Well, I've meditated using this technique called non-contemplative meditation since I was about 8 years old. It's the first time I did it with my father, who coined the term. And I used it all throughout high school and college and after college. And I was in D.C. I was in Washington, D.C. for about 3 months after college. And it was in 2020. It was during the election, the 2020 election, with Trump and Joe Biden. It was during COVID. So everybody had masks on and that kind of thing was going on. It was very heavy then. And I saw a lot of very good people become very angry, very upset, and very, very fearful. And I saw it having a negative effect on people. And I had already planned to, at that point, probably work with my dad in some capacity. But there was sort of a renewed inspiration while I was there. And I realized, okay, how can I help? People need some sort of personal help here. People need to learn how to survive, how to live through what's going on. So I got back with my dad after the 3 months in Washington. And together we created an app. It's called the C app. It features technique non-contemplative meditation. It's something that he's been teaching other people for decades now. He used to hand out CDs about it. And so I sort of took my tech skills. I learned how to code a little. I had taken a few classes in college, but I was sort of self-taught in terms of how to create an app. And we got together, we did the recordings, we did the media, we did everything, and we made the app because I wanted to help the most amount of people possible. And I think this is something that's helped me. And I think it can help other people too. And people seem to like it. People say it's, changed their life, and people lose weight, they stop smoking. It's so we're looking to help people build resilience to stress. And the way the meditation does it is there's the thought observation, the simple sort of thought observation, which is common in a lot of meditative practices. But the key is, frankly, that there's nothing more to it than that, because when you're doing, as opposed to sort of mindfulness and these more Eastern practices where you have these ideas of oneness and sometimes concentration, contemplation, focus. It could be on objects. It could be on your sometimes contemplating your body, things like that. This doesn't have that. This is about watching your thoughts and essentially leaving room for God to do the rest. That's why it's more rooted in Judeo-Christian values than sort of these Eastern oneness type things. So that's what I practice. I do it on a daily basis. And by practicing it in the morning and the night, you're practicing being in that state of being that allows you to separate from the thoughts and the emotions and see things objectively in the moment while you're going through the challenges of your day, while you're scrolling on X and reading news articles you don't like that are tempting you to get really upset. So you practice that, and then you're able to do it throughout your day. So.
So the very common technique, I suppose, of meditation is to focus on your breathing, or to focus on, I don't know, the sensation of the chair on your back or something like that. And most of the time you will get into this meditative state and you will be thinking about, the breathing for 5 seconds. And then the next thing is, oh yeah, the shopping list. And then, why did my other half not load the dishwasher? And, the usual stuff sort of starts to come in. So it's actually very difficult to, constantly stay thinking on one boring thing, because your brain is straight away, it's like, yeah, it's not changing. You're still breathing. You're good to go. And we're like, move on, do something different. So when you're saying about sort of just observing your thoughts and sort of leave the space, like, could you just give us like a little bit of the taster of how the technique that your dad has developed is different, or how does it actually work in terms of these, pesky, completely useless thoughts that sort of jump into your mind when you're trying to focus on, being in the meditating state?
Well, there's no breath work in the meditation. We don't have any focus on breath. What there is there's attention. I mean, there's closing your eyes, putting your hands together, and seeing the lights in front of your eyelids, which sometimes people see, sometimes they don't. Depends how lost in thoughts you are, but everybody can see that sometimes. And noticing your fingers. So that's what this meditation is sort of based in. That's the practical technique. But it's different than a focus on the breath or focus on the body or focus on objects. Some meditations do that, or a mantra. That's another kind of meditation too. So the idea is not to get lost in any one particular rhythmic task or routine, but to simply stay in the present. You have thoughts constantly coming at all times. But simply by staying in the present and realizing when that's happening, that means you're doing it right. You're not supposed to get rid of those thoughts. You're not supposed to silence your mind, but everything does become a little bit quieter when you're seeing those thoughts as they're coming. So having thoughts about the grocery list doesn't mean you failed, because you've already realized that you had a thought about the grocery list, which means you've done it properly. So that's sort of the counterintuitive element to it. But thoughts are constantly coming, and by seeing them, that means you're practicing successfully.
So what are the sort of what are the plans for the future of the app? What are you working on with your dad right now? What can we expect to see you like in the next 2 years?
Well, the way that the app is designed now, it's super simple. You just open it and you tap. You get one choice: 5, 10, or 15 minutes. You make that choice, and then a session is given to you. You don't have to scroll through a catalog of recordings or decide what type of meditation you want to listen to today. You don't have to become sort of a hobbyist in that way. It's all picked out for you. It's meant to be a tool that you pick up in the morning, you put down, you use it again at night, and that's it. You go about your day. So that's sort of the idea of the app. So we really don't want to expand it too far and make it too complicated as a result of that. We do have one feature called today's mini, which everybody gets the same mini every day. It's like a 2-minute recording for the middle of the day for people who want to sort of recenter during the day. But going forward, we would like to probably target some more specific niches for people who would like to quit smoking, quit drinking, lose weight, these types of things. People have different types of problems. There's different sort of, all the sessions are guided. So there's different way to sort of include that guidance in a way for people who want to address specific areas of their lives. The meditation works for everybody now. It's to be used by everybody. It's broad. It doesn't go in any specific direction. But adding something like that in the future, we think would be helpful to a lot of people.
So you've mentioned before when we were talking that the users of your app have reported losing weight, quitting smoking. What is already going on for them with the app and with the tools that you've already got in the app that they can then apply it to so different areas of their life?
Well, a lot of times it happens automatically because what they're doing when they're relying on things like that, and everybody has some sort of vice or bad habit that they go to, they can't seem to break, is you're looking for some sort of relief for the pain of the stress that you're under. And that's why stress resilience is kind of the focal point of the app, of the meditation. It's about building stress resilience, because when you're practicing being in that state, you're overcoming stress better throughout your whole life. And while you're doing that, you can let go of the need for the things that make you feel better, because you're not so negatively affected in the first place. So people will just naturally be able to lose weight or naturally be able to stop smoking. And whatever vice you have that's sort of supplying you with that relief, you'll find you don't need as much. So that's kind of what people have experienced, what I've experienced with certain things. I've used the meditation throughout college and after college too, and my dad as well. So these are things that can naturally happen for people, and they're very grateful for it.
Okay, awesome. So for people that want to find out more about the app, where can they find you online?
You can go to theseeapp.com. That's SEE. So theseeapp.com. We also have presence on Facebook, on Twitter, same idea, the C app. You can find me, D. Schwarzhoff Jr. I'm on X, right? Not Twitter anymore. Now it's X. I'm on X. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. So you can reach out to me there too.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, I give you Daniel Schwarzhoff Jr.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to Wisdom Rebellion. Before you go, if you enjoyed the conversation, please consider subscribing. It massively helps with keeping the show on the road so we can all build a wiser world together. And if you loved this video, you will also love this one. I'll see you there.